Today I'm speaking with Alan Bondar. Alan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Tim. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to our interview here. And just to give a quick bio, Alan, you've got a very interesting background. This is going to be a fun story just to go through what you've been through and also where you've landed. But Alan was a Christian, of course, but he also got into pastoral ministry. His experience in pastoral ministry spanned over 20 years. Before that, his theological education included Word of Life Bible Institute, Cairn University, formerly Philadelphia College of the Bible, which I didn't attend, but I was connected to it in some ways with my time at LBC. Reformed Presbyterian Theological Seminary and Reformed Theological Seminary. That's a lot of Reformed in there. And he was also a regular speaker at conferences such as the Preterist Pilgrim Weekend, Berean Bible Conference, the Kansas City Prophecy Conference. And he is currently a rural letter carrier for the United States Postal Service and partner to Ray Vines and her two children. And as a point of interest, he's also a second-generation immigrant by both parents, his dad being from Russia and his mom from Argentina. And we have a whole bunch of other things we're going to talk about. I did just want to mention one other thing before I pass the ball to you. You're an author. I'm going to have a link for his books that he's written. The ones that you've written so far are from a Christian perspective when you were in what I call Bible prison. The one that's coming out this fall is your story since then, which is probably going to be most relevant. And I'm looking forward to hopefully doing a follow-up interview with you when that's out so we can actually put that on blast and dive into the details of that. But anyway, that's what I know about you so far. Before we get into your story, could you just tell us more about yourself and your hobbies?
Sure. Things I like to do. I love to spend time with Ray, obviously. Binge watching TV shows. It's funny, we were just talking about it today. Binge watching even the types of TV shows you weren't allowed to watch as a Christian. It would get you in trouble with your spouse where she sits there next to me and just watches and we enjoy it together, just anything. And it's amazing. You don't have to worry about all that as long as you both are, in agreement with whatever you're doing. But so that's a fun thing for me to do. I love playing guitar, especially writing songs. I love to be creative with my mind. I love to write. I love to do things that use my mind a lot, like playing chess. Obviously writing books. I love to write. So I'm, coaching the release of my new book as well, which is called How to Kill God the Easy Way. It's going to be a fascinating read and
Nice
an actual going to be testing out pretty soon. So I'm kind of excited about that. I don't know if I mentioned soccer. I like playing soccer, especially with Ray's son. We have a great time out there, just kicking the ball around. I love cooking. This is new to me. It's so funny because when I was a pastor, I was so inundated with church planting and church life and God and everything. I didn't have time to really figure out what I enjoyed doing for myself. It was very fascinating. So now I have some time and I got into cooking and I'm like, I really enjoy it. As I bought a sous vide maker, that's where you do water temperature cooking, right? And you plastic, and it's amazing. It's so exciting, like cooks everything to perfection, and then you sear it. Oh man, I've had some fun with that. So
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's been wild. I can't even believe it. Like, it's fun, and it's not just that I like it. Ray actually says I'm decent at it, so the food I'm producing actually tastes good. So it's been nice. I enjoy Broadway theater. We love doing that. The last play we saw was the last musical we saw was The Book of Mormon.
Oh wow!
And that was fun. I've seen it twice now in my life. I saw it once as a Christian, and I thought it was really funny then because it made fun of Mormons. After being an atheist and watching it the second time, I thought it was really funny because now I can see how it also makes fun of Christians because it's the same principle. So it was just all around. It was just a really funny story. And I just couldn't believe that on that side of my life, I couldn't see the parallels. But so that's enjoyable. And, something I've looked forward to doing in the future, something maybe a little quirky about me is that we're just buying a new house. So we're very excited about that. And we need one more bathroom in this house. I figured out where it's going to go, but I've never done this myself. My family does building and construction and electricity and all that, so I'll be able to tap into them for ideas and help. But I'm going to be pretty much YouTubing this thing and putting a bathroom in.
Nice.
So this will be. I'm excited to try this. I hope it works out.
Yeah. Well, you seem like a Renaissance man and a jack of all trades. That's awesome. I love that. And certainly when you learn more things you can do yourself and save a lot of money, next step, become a car mechanic, and who knows, fix it all yourself.
I've tried that in the past, and it was all right. I started to get decent at it, but then I realized it's way too much work. It's not worth it.
Yeah. I hear you. Well, we're of course here to hear people's stories. We love to get to know people and kind of get acquainted with where they're coming from, especially relating to things that help us to understand how your worldview shaped. So if I could pass the ball back to you, I'll jump in with some questions, but If you could take us back to the earliest days, how did you get exposed to the Bible and Jesus?
Of course. Well, I grew up in what you would call a Christian home. Both parents were Christians, diehard Christians, the kind of extreme Christians that go to church for every event there is, right? And nothing interferes with that. You pray at every meal, pray before bedtime, no exceptions. Like these are the rules, you know. So I never knew anything different. I grew up in that culture. I never had an opportunity for them to say, go experience this and see if you like this better. It wasn't like that. This is how you're raised. This is what it is. God is real. You have to be saved. You have to say this prayer, and that's how you go to heaven. And that's it. Like, it's just as simple as that. Unfortunately, that's never been, well, I should say fortunately, it's never really been the type of thing that sets well with me, because for some reason I've always been more inquisitive than that. I can't let my mind just be like, okay, somebody said this, so there it goes. So I was the black sheep of the family and had to venture out of that and just think outside the box and always understand why I believed what I believed. It wasn't enough for me to just believe it because my parents said it. You know, when I was real young, it was, but I never felt that attachment to only believing what my parents say. So very early, I started to break out of that and start to think for myself. Ironically, I became an even stronger Christian as a result, because I never questioned that the Bible was true. Somehow that just kind of got so stuck in my head that it was just, the Bible says God is real. God says his word is true. Therefore it's true. And I just got caught in that circular reasoning, the Christian matrix, if you will.
Yep.
And so I thought outside the box in every possible way, except outside the matrix. So I was stuck in that matrix, but I would push my limits in every single way, just wanting to understand the truth. So even at like 8 years old, I was leading my family in devotions. You know, I would be the one to study a passage and bring golden nuggets from the text and be like, look what this says in Daniel, you know, like Daniel, look at Obadiah. I'm 8 years old, you know, I'm getting into the prophets and stuff. But I really enjoyed that a lot. And for some reason, just the Bible just consumed me. I just got a real passion for it, to a degree where I was even an idiot, because I already got picked on at school as it was for being a dork, you know, and I don't know why, you know, sometimes you're the one who gets the dork card. That was me. But, you know, to add insult to injury, I would carry my Bible, you know, around to school. That did not help my popularity at all. But nonetheless, I studied the Bible when I was 7, probably right around 7, before I started like getting really into the devotions. My sister led me to Christ the first time. She knew enough to present the ABC gospel presentation, you know, admit, believe, and confess, you know. And so, or acknowledge, believe, and confess. So I did that, and I said the prayer, and you know, at the time I thought it was genuine. But then at age 8, probably about a year later, we attended, by the way, when I was a child, we attended the Slavic Church of Christ. Because as you said, my mom was from Argentina, and her parents were from Uruguay, I think, either Paraguay or Uruguay, her dad, and her mom was from Poland, I think, or her grandma was from Poland. Anyway, it's a big melting pot.
So what language were the services in? Just curious.
All of them.
Wow. Nice.
So it was torture. So imagine not just having to endure as a child a really boring English sermon, but now you have to hear it in 3 different languages, broken up. So you'd say it in English, then somebody would repeat it in Polish, and somebody would repeat it in Russian. And the whole sermon was like, and it was torturous. But, you know, and my mom, you know, of course, they wanted me to pay attention, even though I'd doze or want to play. You know, I'd get the pinch in the leg, pay attention. So that was my upbringing. But one day, I don't know what it was, but something took. I don't know if it was that I was getting tired of being pinched as much as I was, or if the pastor actually said something impactful. I don't remember, but for some reason I walked the aisle. Now that seems to be one of the essentials to a lot of Christians. You walk an aisle, you go to the front, you cry, they pray over you, and then you're supposedly saved. However, you still have to have an interview with the pastor. Now at that church, my pastor was my uncle. Everybody at this church was kind of like related in some crazy way. But the pastor was my uncle, my great uncle. Great uncle, I guess. Anyway, I had to tell him at age 8 my understanding of the gospel. Well, apparently it wasn't sufficient enough. I didn't explain it well enough. I don't know if it's because it didn't include baptism as a part of salvation. But for some reason he was like, "Nope, you're not ready. You can't be baptized." And I was like, "So I'm not saved?" So I was saved at 6, sorry, saved at 7, saved at 8, still not saved. 9 years old rolls around. We're at a Steve Green concert. I don't know if you know who Steve Green is.
Oh, yeah.
Not my style of music at all, but a really good singer, pure, beautiful. But there was something about what he said that day, and of course now I've been studying the Bible a lot, as I told you, for the last year, and I'm really into this stuff. And now somebody's talking that's like got my attention, and for some reason something captured my heart there, and he asked, everybody bow your heads, raise your hand if you want to be saved, that whole thing. So now I've said the sinner's prayer, I've walked an aisle, I've raised my hand, repented again, said the sinner's prayer. This time I met with my uncle again for an interview, and apparently I got the gospel right this time. I'm not sure why it was different, but I got it right. And he baptized me. So now I am going to heaven, right? I've had the gospel right. I've said my prayer. I've raised my hand. I've walked my aisle. I even got baptized. And in the Church of Christ, baptism is an essential, even the Slavic Church of Christ, to going to heaven. So now I have all my bases covered. I mean, if I'm not saved, who's saved? What else do you do? And it's not like I was just faking any of this. I was really, really into it. It never crossed my mind to consider any other alternative in life. All I wanted was to please God. All I wanted was to know him so much. All I wanted was to get the gospel right. All I wanted was to go to heaven and be with him. That was really my passion. So much so that even at a young age, probably around 10, 11, I was even preaching the sermons at the youth services at my church. And it was a pretty large church, because by that point we had switched over to a Baptist church called Perry Hill Baptist Church in Maryland. Just because, we were kind of outgrowing the Slavic church at that point, and my parents wanted us to have a better experience in church. So it was a decent church, growing up. It was a lot of fun. Youth ministry was great. I loved my youth pastors, most of them. But for the most part, I was really, really invested. I remember even being the one in my family they asked to preach at my grandmother's funeral, my great grandmother's funeral. I was like, what? And I was like 12. So that's how invested I was in this. And I remember my great uncle, the one who claimed me saved now finally and baptized me, after that message at that funeral, I remember him coming up to me and saying, I truly believe God is calling you to be a pastor, calling you to the ministry. And I was like, wow, it's a lot coming from you who rejected my salvation at age 8. But here I am, and he's the one telling me God's calling. So I'm like, okay, so now I feel like I have this internal call. And then there's this external call that somebody's telling me that God's given it to me. And I remember when I eventually get to seminary, they taught about the 3 calls: the internal, the external, and then the support of the call from God, I guess, and then the people supporting it or something like that. I forget what it is now, but there was like the trifecta, and I had all of them. And so that was my desire. By age 12, even already, I knew I wanted to be a youth pastor. By maybe it was 13. I had no doubt. I was like, I want to be a youth pastor because I want to have the same influence these youth pastors are having on me. And I believe that I can get people as passionate about the Bible as I am, and get teenagers to love God. Like, I really believe that. So that's what I did. First I started out with a music career in Baltimore, just because my first 2 years in college, and my dad was a musician. And he taught music to elementary school students all of his career. I actually went to his school and was in the band and everything with him. And so I took 2 years of music and got my Associate of Arts degree in music. And then from there I went to Word of Life Bible Institute, because this was it. This was the place, because my brother-in-law, who was a big advocate, my brother-in-law at the time, who was a big advocate of Word of Life Bible Institute, he told me, when you go there, all you do is study the Bible. Yep. You don't have to do math or English or all this. You literally just study the Bible. I'm like, that's for me. So I was like, hook, line, and sinker, man. Give me my backpack. I'm going today. It didn't take much at all. So that was it. That was my life. I knew it 100%. All I needed in this world was God and his word. That was it. Nothing else mattered. So I forsook everything else to a degree where I became, and I don't mean this to berate myself or sound like I'm putting myself down, but I became very stupid in a lot of things in life because all I knew was the Bible. That's all I studied. All I cared about was God. So I didn't learn history or politics or social studies or math. I just kind of ignored all that, thinking this was all that mattered. And now, I'm at this point in my life, and I'm looking back, I'm like, man, I wish I would have spent more time learning some of these things that could have benefited me more in this stage of my life. But now it's like starting over. I'm having to regrow myself, so to speak, and at a very rapid rate. But alas, that'll come later. Let me get back to my story. But anyway, so here I am. I'm at Word of Life Bible Institute, really loving it. Everything's great. I do remember a few times walking around, looking up at the sky, thinking, "Man, is this real?" Because you suddenly see yourself in this big giant world, and you're with a bunch of other Christians at this school that are supposed to be as passionate as you are, and they're not. They're off in the woods having sex with each other, and stealing and going to the movies when at Word of Life you got demerits for that. You weren't allowed to go to the movies. That was against their rules. There was a lot of things you weren't allowed to do. Even when you were on break, if you went to the movies, you could get demerits. You can kick that out of the seminary, out of the school. I mean, so that was a big deal. So I'm like, what is wrong with these people? This doesn't make sense. So I remember having some of my own struggles starting at that point. Just now I'm on my own. Now I'm not in the bubble. I'm out on my own, trying to figure life out. And I'm like, wow, there's some times that I'm looking up and I'm praying and I'm like, God, where are you? This is just not adding up,
So were you leaning towards wanting to be more legalistic, or leaning towards away from it and thinking legalism was stifling your relationship with Christ?
So just a quick broad statement, and then we can get into details if you like. Over the course of my journey in Christianity through to my pastorship in my final church, my legalism died over the years. I became far more cognizant that most of these things the Bible does not teach or sin.
Right.
Now, as far as the things that I still thought the Bible was sin, I was very trapped by that. And for example, sex. I had a tremendous internal battle with that. Not just sex, but pornography and lust. And because those things were evil and sinful, and that one evil, lustful thought was enough to condemn me to an eternal torment in hell because you just offended a holy God. So I had to live that torment for most of actually pretty much my entire Christian life, even through my marriage. I always had that constant battle, and it was tough, very, very tough. That was one of the most difficult things I had to struggle with. But it wasn't just that. I went through stages where an addiction would be considered sin. I think an addiction is terrible, and I deal with that in my book, but I don't think it's sin. And I used to be tormented by that. Like, I would smoke, and prior to smoking, of course, I thought it was a great sin, and I would judge people for it. And I remember my cousin, Jamie. He used to smoke as well. I don't whether he does it now or not. I'm not even sure. But I remember being we were at a youth trip, I think. Oh no, I think it was at James Boyce's funeral, for that matter. Actually, I was like, it was an odd thing. We were going to the bathroom, whatever, and as we were leaving, he lit up a cigarette. And the most astonishing thing happened. This was when we were in college already. I remember by that point, I had already freed myself from a lot of the legalism, and I by that point remember knowing in my head that smoking was not a sin, drinking was not a sin. None of these things were sins. I knew that by this point because I'd studied myself out of that. But being in that very moment where the first person that I knew that was a Christian lit up in front of me, I didn't know what to do. It just took my breath away. I was like, this is wrong. I knew it here, but I was so inundated with that my whole life, I couldn't free myself from that feeling. It was just so hard. In a way, I'm so glad it happened, because that was my first experience to actually realize that your emotions don't often, touch with your mind, and it takes some time to break out of that. Even coming out of Christianity, there's so many things from that still affect me, even though my mind knows they're not true. For example, my shame, that Christianity put on me all of those years, and I'm still in therapy today, trying to find my person. Who I am? Who am I? Do I have to be ashamed of myself? And it's very sad because it's played because as a Christian, your whole life is God. You need Jesus because you are a worthless sinner, worthy of nothing but eternal damnation, especially in the Reformed type of thinking, which I was, and I really believe the Bible teaches stuff like that. There is none righteous, no, not one. All have become sinners. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Your righteous acts are as filthy rags. there was no escaping this. So I got myself to a point in Christianity where I believed I was nothing. I was a worthless, useless nothing. And my only hope to have any value was Christ. Without him, I'm valueless. So now here we are as an atheist. You take away Christ, that did not fix all of that deep-seated loss of value that I had put in myself for all of those years.
Mm.
And it's tough, man. It's tough. And it's very sad what Christianity does.
It is. And I think too, it's for so many of us, while you're in it, there's that knowledge that God can see inside your head and your heart, and you can't really have a secret sin. It's nothing secret to him. And so you do end up in many cases having a real double life where you're on stage, with doing youth ministry or whatever, leading worship. You're on stage doing soup kitchen work, whatever. You're preaching. You have this facade of, I'm this good example. You should all kind of follow me because I'm a leader in the church in some way. And then you go home and you just think I'm a facade. I'm a fake. And in some ways you go back and forth, like you bounce, like I'm not really a fake because I'm confessing my sins. And even Paul says in Romans 7, like, I hate the things I do. I don't do the things I want to do. Like that, this is normal. This is what Paul went through. I'm not fake. But then you think sometimes it feels like I'm fake because I'm not fighting sin that much.
Mm-hmm.
I remember sometimes in my journey, very similar. I mean, a lot of your stuff I relate to, but I remember at one point thinking almost like God is saying there's a dividing line, Tim. I'm asking you, are you going to follow me? Or are you going to follow your flesh? And I remember thinking at one particular time, just thinking in my head, I don't know that I've got the power to say no to whatever it was, to lust or masturbation or something. I don't know if I've got the power to say no, like permanently. I can say no for a day or a week, but to say no permanently, I think I would just be tricking myself to say, yes, it's all over. And God, this is all yours now. And thinking, I think I just told God to basically go, screw himself. And I'm like, wow, like you're crossing some lines here. Like did you really just say that to God? Like, no, God, I'm not going to completely submit to you. And it kind of took my breath away, but yet I felt like it was honest. It's like, this is really a struggle. I don't think I can win this battle, but yet I was like, I hate myself for it. And you do hate yourself because you think you want at that point. It's like you said, if God is your whole life, where else are you going to go? It's like, there's only one electric company in town. If you don't pay your bill, where else are you going to go? This is it. And just, that's it. It puts you in that spin of like my public life and my private life, and never the twain hopefully shall meet.
Yep. Touching on that, it's very fascinating. One of the concepts I deal with in my book, and primarily my book is about being addicted to God. That's why it's called How to Kill God the Easy Way. Now, the reason it's called the Easy Way is because it's a book that is paralleled with Alan Carr's Easy Way method. So, and I'm going to preface what I was about to tell you because I got to do a little explaining here, but then I think it's going to come full circle. A lot of people think that the reason I left Christianity is because, I just wanted to live the sinful life, and because I wanted to look at porn, I wasn't allowed to as a Christian, or because I want to eat babies, or because I'm angry at God, all the reasons in the world that have nothing to do with why I left Christianity. I didn't leave for any of those reasons. They had no bearing on my decision. I wasn't going to something when I left Christianity. I was simply leaving something. And believe you me, when I left, I had no idea what I was going to do. Here, I just like stepped into a black hole, so to speak. And I was like, well, what do I do now? As you remember, I learned nothing else. I did nothing else with my life but God. That's all I knew. So now I'm like, how do I survive in this world? I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't have any other skills. I had to figure out how to use my transferable skills from pastoring. But it was tough because that takes a lot of years to build a reputation, for public speaking and writing and stuff like that. So that wasn't going to be my immediate fix. So it was tough. So anyway, yes, for those who think that I left because I wanted that life, that wasn't it. That had nothing to do with it. It never even crossed my mind. Leaving God never even crossed my mind, except that my house of cards fell one day, and I honestly didn't know why at first. When I got divorced, my church shut down for all the reasons we don't need to discuss here, but it happened. Whatever happened. So here I am now, very depressed, found a way to make a living. Ended up working for United States Postal Service as a letter carrier, and so here I am. I'm depressed. I'm living with my parents because I can't even stand on my own 2 feet practically. Like they have to help me eat. Yeah, it was like raising a baby. This is how far down I had gone. And but I'm still a Christian. And during this time, I am going to therapy, counseling, her pastor, and of course Christian counselors, Christian therapists, her pastor. Had to be Christians, right? So I'm still invested here. I'm still trying to read the Bible. I'm still praying, going on prayer walks, meeting with a pastor once a week, meeting with their Christian counselor once a week. Then I also had a therapist. The therapist wasn't a Christian. He was Jewish, but he was the one who ends up helping me the most. And I still meet with him today. Love that guy, Avadia. Oh, what an amazing guy. If you're in Maryland, my goodness, I highly recommend his therapy. But anyway, that being said, when I was in these sessions, they were still pushing the whole idea that, you need to turn back to God. You need to confess your sins. The whole reason that you're feeling this is because you got divorced, and divorce is a sin, and you should have stayed in marriage no matter what. Those kinds of things. And, they didn't maybe say it like that, but they said it nonetheless. It was these types of thoughts. And it was never enough. No matter how much I prayed, no matter how much I asked for forgiveness, no matter how many times I confessed my sins and told God how much I wish I didn't make them, no matter how much I wept and went to therapy and counseling, begged everybody to help me see God again, it was never enough. It was never enough for God to reach down and say, okay, I've put you through enough torture. I now take you back and let you feel my presence. It was like one mistake and you're out, dude. After all my years pouring my life into God, you do this thing, you close down your church, you get divorced, and you're out. That's it. That's the end, and it's just like something just wasn't triggering, and I was like, why isn't God there? What else do I need to do? It just, and no matter how many things they told me to do, it just was never, ever enough. All right. Let's parallel that with another part of my life. Now I'm also working at USPS during all this time. I'm depressed, and I pick up smoking for the second time in my life, ironically. First time in my life, I went through it, did Alan Carr's easy way to quit smoking, didn't smoke for 6-7 years, free, had no desire to do it whatsoever. I didn't smoke with these friends because I actually cared. I wanted to smoke. I really didn't. But I was so depressed. I just was like, at this point, I was like, I don't care if I die. Just give me the damn cigarette. I want to hang out with my friends on breaks. So that's what we did. And I started getting, and I got hooked. The second time breaking a habit or breaking that addiction was really, really hard. It was nothing like the first time. The book is magical when you read it the first time. It has this incredible effect where it removes all the brainwashing that you have as a smoker that makes you think you like smoking. Because that's really, and same with any addiction, that's really the problem with addiction is you're brainwashed to think you like it by society, by culture, by promotion, by ads, by friends, whatever it is. You grew up with all these beliefs that even when I was growing up, all my heroes, Bruce Willis and Die Hard, he's got a cigarette in his mouth the whole movie, it's like, so you praise these guys and you think, oh, that's cool. And so you're brainwashed to think this is a wonderful thing. And even when I was younger, doctors said, oh yeah, smoking is great. They would even have commercials for it. So, so when you're inundated with that, you're completely brainwashed to think this is a wonderful thing. And then once you get it and you get that dopamine high that actually lasts a little longer than good relationships and good things in life that are supposed to give you that high, but then, balance, this just gets you up there and it's like unusual. You're like, oh my God, I need that again. And so you get stuck in this trap. So the first time you read this book, it's like watching a movie like The Sixth Sense. Did you ever see that movie?
Yeah.
I love that movie. You get to the end, you get chills, right? I mean, you get that surprise, and you're just like, no way, right? That effect disappears the second time you watch the movie because you already know the end. It doesn't have that magic anymore. The same thing happens with Alan Carr's method. The one thing he warns at the very end of his book is if you get free, which he does for you, don't ever pick up a cigarette again. You got to never do it. Well, when you're depressed and don't care about your life, you kind of forget about the rule. So that's how I got stuck again. And the brainwashing came swooping back in, fell in love with it again. It was wonderful. And no matter how, and I read the book, telling you no lie. I read this book again no less than 20 times in a matter of 2 months. I read it and read it and read it and read it, just looking for anything in there that I missed that just might trigger that magic again to get me to not want this anymore. Because you, if you try to white knuckle, all you're going to do the rest of your life is crave something you can't have, and you're always wanting it in the back of your mind. With Alan Carr's method, at least when the first time you read it, you don't have that. It literally goes away. You don't want it, and it's easy not to do something you don't want to do. But when you want it, it's really hard. So I'm the kind of person that if I have to live the rest of my life struggling not to have something I want, I'm not going to do it. It's stupid. I might as well enjoy it and not suffer. But I also remember the feeling of not wanting it, and I wanted that back. So I kept reading it and kept reading. And I read it over and over, and it wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work. I contacted the company, paid $400 to do their one-on-one seminars with them. Where actually it's like a group, but the virtual. And I did it 3 times with them, and it still didn't work. I was discouraged, but I'm a dog on a bone, and I refused to quit. Oh, no pun intended. But I kept going, and I kept trying, and I kept thinking through everything. And I started writing down the book. I started writing it out myself, but from memory, because by this time I know this book inside and out, inside out and backwards. I know how all of it works. So I start writing my own journey, trying to figure out what point, because I'm a person who loves to solve puzzles. I'm a puzzle guy. I can fix things. I know how to put things together. So I kept doing that. I was like, I'm going to figure this out. And lo and behold, I don't know what happened. Just somehow through putting it down and processing everything and seeing it all, it hit me like a ton of bricks one day. There I was driving down the road with cigarette lit in hands, and I'm driving and I'm thinking through this some more, and I'm like, it occurs to me that I'm my own warden, throwing myself back in prison every time I try to walk away. The only problem for me was that I wouldn't let myself walk away. For some reason, I had this mind that kept telling myself that you like this. I don't know what it was, but something that day just triggered in me and said, you don't like this. Why are you doing this? You're your own warden. You want to kill your warden, just walk away and never look back. I smoked that cigarette, I threw it out the window, and I swear to God, that is the last time I have smoked a cigarette. I'm happy to tell you that I'm a happy non-smoker again, and I have no cravings whatsoever. In fact, yesterday we were somewhere where I smoked smoke, and I was like, that's disgusting. It just turns me off now. So I'm super happy to finally have reached that. Now, here's where all this ties together. What I didn't realize was happening while I was removing the brainwashing from my desire to smoke again. At the same time, I was removing the brainwashing from being a Christian, and I didn't even realize it was happening. Somehow, the process of removing brainwashing is the same for every single addiction. So by doing it so many times through, I was taking a layer of my Christian beliefs away, one piece at a time, until the very end, when finally the house of cards came crashing down for that too. It was almost simultaneous where my finishing smoking and finishing Christianity took place. And I didn't see it at the time until I interviewed with Jen, and she asked me why I left. And when she asked me that, it took me back, and I was like, I don't know. I was like, but there's got to be a reason. I know there is. I don't know. Why was it so easy for someone like me to just walk away? It didn't make any sense. So I was like, I got to get to the bottom of this. Why was it so easy for me? It was the same reason it was easy for me to walk away from smoking, because I don't want it anymore, because it isn't real. It's not so satisfying. It doesn't do what it says it's going to do. In fact, Christianity creates a void that it cannot be filled. Just like any addiction, it doesn't fill the void, it creates it. And that's what it does. It creates a problem in your life called sin, which isn't a thing. And every time you do it, you need God's forgiveness. And so the way I parallel it is that the tobacco is the sin wrapped in the paper of God's forgiveness. They go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. So without sin, God's forgiveness is useless, but God's forgiveness is needed whenever you do sin. So they go hand in hand like that. The combination of sin and God's forgiveness creates a void that cannot be filled. So you're always chasing that dopamine high, and you can never reach it because you have to sin to feel God's forgiveness, because if you don't have sin, you don't need God's forgiveness. But now you're trapped in this vicious cycle where you're always seeking that dopamine high. The only way to get God's forgiveness is to sin, but you don't want to sin because you want to keep God's forgiveness, but you can't continue to feel God's forgiveness, so you're trapped. And the only way to feel God's forgiveness is continue to do all the things you have to do as a Christian to feel his forgiveness. Go to church every Sunday, read your Bible all day, pray 4 times a day, make sure you never miss an event at church, give 10% of your income, serve in a minute. And your life is so inundated, and that's the only way to stay there, is to just do. So if your whole life is filled with nothing but by the brainwashing that sustains itself. And so what that does is it keeps you under the brain control of guilt, shame, and fear. And that is exactly what Christianity does. And that's why Christianity needs sin and God, because they work together. It needs sin so that you want God, and God is why you need to have sin. Like all this came together. And that, so what I'm doing in my book is I'm like, if I can be free, so can anybody. But you can't, but all the reasons that make Christianity bad are not going to make someone else not believe any more than it did me. It's never going to work. You can't, all the reasons to leave Christianity did not free me, nor do I expect them to free anyone else. It's a better way of saying that.
Just to jump in real quick, for anyone that doesn't know the Jen you're referring to, that's Jen Fishburne. The YouTube channel is called Answers from Genesis. I'll have the link beneath this video for that, for your interview with her. And you all are also, just as a side note, you all are doing some other really cool videos there, kind of a collaboration here for a while, beyond just your particular story, but you're kind of taking some topics, a lot of them relating to deconstruction and addiction to God, but great stuff there. I just want to make sure that I plug that. And thank you to Jen Fishburne for the great work she's doing on her channel. But I was just going to say too, one of the things that you said reminded me of something from Dan Barker, the idea, and this is a little different, it's not the addiction concept, but the sense of Christianity creates the problem and then fixes it. He talks in one of his talks about how, would you really respect a doctor who comes at you with a razor knife and cuts you and then sells you a Band-Aid? It's like,
right.
Yeah, I appreciate the Band-Aid, but you're the one that caused the problem in the first place,
Exactly. No, you're absolutely right. And the only time Christianity is thought of as a positive thing is by those who are addicted to it, just like addicts of other addictions. We all think we like it. We all think it's a wonderful thing because you're brainwashed to think so. And that's the problem with Christians. I don't think Christians are stupid any more than I think I'm stupid, although in some areas I do, like I said. But for the most part, I find myself to be a very intelligent person. I don't know why I got trapped other than the brainwashing. And so I was like, when I clued into that, I was like, man, Christians can all be free. They just need someone to help them remove the brainwashing. I got lucky. But now I've turned it around, and I'm writing this in a book, The Journey. That's why it's called How to Kill God the Easy Way. Because if you can remove the big monster, the brainwashing, from people's lives, the little monster of that constant void of being in that cycle, it's like fluff on your shoulder. It just goes away, just like you're craving for the cigarette. It's not there anymore.
Yeah.
So that is what I'm trying to do, and it's a very methodical read through. It's not a big hefty theological work, where I'm going and destroying all the Christian views, and I deal with some of them in the book just because it's necessary at certain parts, but that's not the intent behind the book.
It's interesting too how for so many of us, what breaks that addiction can be so different. Like, what I mean is I've had people who tell their story, and their main point was maybe more about the idea of the kids around the planet dying of starvation, and there's like, I just can't imagine a good God. They didn't learn anything about comparative mythology or the Greco-Roman mystery cults or whatever. They didn't dig into all kinds of things from the actual text and the discrepancies. They just said, this doesn't make sense. Why would God let thousands of kids die every day from starvation? Doesn't make any sense. And yet for someone else, it is those discrepancies. It is looking at people like Bart Ehrman and finding out there's a lot more to this story. And when you just get educated about how the Bible got created and canonicity, those things begin to hit at you hard. Or learning about the Yahweh character and his evolution with El and Asherah and all that. For me, it was more the Greco-Roman mystery cults, learning about the Greek pantheon and learning about the ways that they copied from that pantheon and from their mystery cults and from Homer's Odyssey with Dennis MacDonald's work. And just, sum it up as comparative mythology. That's what got me, but that was like the only thing, because I did see the atrocities of the Old Testament, the whole genocide and child bride stuff. It hurt me to think I'm supposed to defend this as a Christian, but it didn't deconvert me. It should have, arguably, And I joke now, like, not just the atrocities, but just like the ridiculousness of it. A God who says, cut off the end of little boys' penises, and a God who says, I want you to pretend to eat my son's dead son's body and drink his blood. Like, it's just, this is really weird stuff.
Mm.
All of it should have deconverted me, but the one thing that got me was studying about the Greco-Roman mystery cults. That helped me to get escape. But for every person, it's me. We all keep going back to either seems like the Matrix or the Wizard of Oz, but pull back the curtain and you see the wizard there, or you see that you're stuck in the Matrix. Whatever illustration helps. But once you see it, and like you're saying, that addiction, like once you see it, like, oh, I've been brainwashed. And once it really like fully hits you, not like a hint of maybe I'm being misled, but I'm the sucker in the room. I like to say that because I was. I'm the sucker in the room, and I've been duped. I've been part of a system, and I've had the key to the prison. To go back to your analogy, I've had the key to the prison cell right in my hand this whole time. And once you see it, it's like, no more. I'm done. That's it. It's over. And it's fully over. It's awesome how, again, we're all so different. Our backgrounds are different. Our anxieties of how do we figure this out are different. But once you find that key, or maybe a mixture of all of them, but once you get over a certain hurdle, it's like you just, all the dominoes fall, and you cannot go back, even if you wanted to. Even if you're like, I really did want to live forever, I really did want to go to heaven, you know in your head you can't go back. And it's an amazing journey to think about, just like you're saying, the addiction, and how hard it is for so many of us to just open our eyes and let the scales fall off.
Yep. And I'm convinced that that removal of the brainwashing is what did it for all of us. And here's what I mean. So you gave examples of things that didn't at first cause you to see it and open your prison cell. But every one of those things were removing layers that you didn't even realize you were doing just by studying.
Right.
And then for you, it was one thing. For others, it was another. It doesn't matter. But somebody else's was your final thing was the first layer. Their final thing was your first layer. So, but over the course of time, we're removing stuff. We don't realize we're doing it. And then one day, for those of us who are fortunate, that last one just hits us and we're like, huh, I don't believe this anymore. You don't know why. You're just like, what? And that's why I wanted to bring, this forward, so that I can help people see why they're being free and help others be free by it. And for me, the last straw was prayer. As I said, I was taking these prayer walks, talking to God, begging for God, wanting to hear his voice. And then one day I was just walking and I'm like praying, and I just stopped mid-sentence and I said, the hell am I talking to? It just suddenly occurred to me, I was quite literally talking to the air. I'm like, and I felt quite foolish for a moment. And I was like, what am I doing? It was the weirdest feeling. And I just walked out of my prison and I was like, well, that's the end of that. And it didn't make any sense. Now, I have a friend named Jeremiah Thompson. He's been one of my closest friends pretty much my whole life since my Word of Life days. We went to Word of Life together. We have some great stories from that. But I remember talking to him because I was already in this place where I was very, very close to walking out that door, because I was right there, and I was out at dinner with him, and he had already left Christianity, unbeknownst to me. And I was like, really? There's a world outside of Christianity? And in some sense, he gave me that permission, to just be okay, to walk away. And that's why I finally just hit me. I was like, that was my second to last straw, and then prayer. And that was it. And that was it for me. And so I think that's how it works for everybody that gets out. You got to get those layers gone, because much like you earlier on, I was the opposite of you. I saw Michael Loomis. I don't know if you know who he is. He used to do a show called Preterist Radio, and held us all together and allowed us to do a bunch of shows and everything. It was a really cool program at the time, the way he pulled that off. Anyway, he had escaped too at some point years before I did. And he tried to show me all these other gods and parallels and all this stuff going on, all these ancients and everything, and how the Bible was just borrowing stories. And he showed it to me as clearly as could be. It wasn't enough at the time. Now I'm on this side. I'm like, why did that not free me before? It makes, like, now I'm looking at it, it's so obvious. But at the time, it was just one more layer that I needed to be removed. So it's a process for all of us. Unfortunately, nobody just gets to wake up one day from Christianity and just magically walk away. And it's a process.
Yeah. Can I piggyback on something? One thing you said. You mentioned the word preterism, and you did such a good and thorough job talking about that in at least the one interview I listened to on Jen's channel. Again, Answers from Genesis, with a J, not a G. But again, I'll have the link for that for anyone that wants to find it. But preterism, you knocked it out of the park explaining it there. So I don't want to duplicate it per se, but just for anyone that isn't aware of that, or maybe they know a little bit, but more enough to be dangerous. Can you just take us maybe 5 or 10 minutes max and just tell us, what is preterism? How did it evolve to you? And what did it mean to your journey out of Christianity as a whole?
Oh, sure. And before I do, let me just mention, because you had mentioned that Jen and I are doing a show together right now. It's called Addicted to God, and it's loosely based on my book. So we're following the chapters of my book and doing it in a live version at 30 awesome. Minutes. It's a lot of fun. So if you want to kind of, whoever's watching wants to kind of see where the book's going, that's what we're doing there with the show. But to answer your question, preterism was another layer of brainwashing that I removed. And what preterism is, when you look at the biblical text, one of the things that I had struggled with for quite a number of years, actually, from my early youth pastor years, probably when I first got out of, when I was in college, at the time it was called Philadelphia College of the Bible. That's before they changed it to Philadelphia Biblical University and then changed it again to Cairn. But back when I was, in that college, I was a youth pastor part-time at a church. And I was already starting to question things then. And I remember these passages in the Bible that talked about the soon impending judgment, that Christ is coming soon, any minute now, stuff like that. These things will shortly take place. Some of you standing here will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom, Matthew 16, 27, 28. So those passages always bothered me. But as I studied them further and studied some of what some of my favorite theologians and authors wrote about, I came to become what's called a partial preterist. A partial preterism, the term preterism is a Latin term. It just means past fulfilled. Essentially, it's just saying that a preterist believes that the prophecies of Jesus, the judgment, second coming, all that stuff is in the past rather than in our future. And they took place at an event in history called the destruction of Jerusalem at the year 70 AD or CE, however you like to say it.
So Jesus is still coming back someday, but that will be reflected in a few passages. But most of the passages that talk about his coming are already occurred in early Christianity's time frame.
Correct, and that's partial preterism. So partial preterists still believe there's one more second coming, ultimate one, but all the passages about the judgment of the they call it a coming of Christ that took place. It's like a spiritual coming of sorts, and the resurrection of some sorts. All that takes place in some sense at the destruction of Jerusalem, but there's the final one that really. So that's partial preterism, because they still believe there's passages that teach about the second coming of Christ, and or in many cases don't believe the Bible teaches anything future, but the creeds and confessions that we're required to adhere to as Christians do teach a future one. So they're conflicted with what the Bible teaches against what the church says is truth. So they say, well, this is what the Bible teaches, so I'll believe that, but I'll also believe this, even though they contradict. And that hit me at some point later, which is my journey to full preterism, because it wasn't adding up anymore. I was like, well, I couldn't find.
But God's not the author of confusion, just to make sure everyone's clear on that.
Right, exactly. God's not the author of confusion. Exactly. But I started to see the problem. There were no more texts in the Bible left to talk about some future. I saw one night I was just studying and it hit me. I was like, where is the text that talks about something else? Every single one of them placed it in a first century context. Not to mention, you add to that audience relevance, because I by this point I had already believed audience relevance 100%. So when you read that and the authors are talking to these people, and I realized, I'm like, they're not talking to me or us in 2,000 years later. They're talking to this church and telling this church that Christ is coming soon to alleviate their struggles and their suffering. What does that have to do with me? So that hit me. And that's why I was like, wait a second, something's awry here. And I'm one who doesn't care about the cost. I care about truth. I always have. And that's why I couldn't seem to keep a job as a youth pastor, because I kept advancing my beliefs as I grew in the word. And then I had to leave that church because they had a different view than this church. And then I'd work at this church, and then that view outlived that church, and then I had to go to this church. So finally I became a full preterist, saw all these passages in the past, didn't care at all, about what creeds and confessions said that a bunch of men put together. I cared about what God's word said, because clearly this is God's word. He said it was. So I went there, and I didn't have an option for a preterist church. So I was like, well, I guess I'm going to plant my own. And that's what I did. And that's how that went down.
And is that Lift Church?
That was Lift Church. That's correct.
And that church is still in existence?
No, that church went for 10 years. Near the end, we were getting very strong, and that's when everything just kind of fell apart in my life, and I shut it down and moved.
Interesting. So that was. It's amazing to me that, I mean, just as a quick side note, going back to the joke about, God's not the author of confusion. When you get a bunch of Christians in a room and talk about a couple simple things, let's talk about angels and demons. Let's talk about end times. Let's talk about the future kingdom. And so many people will not just say different interpretations, but they're ready to fight over it. And some of them are willing to separate over it. It's really crazy. And I remember this one guy, my dad was a Christian school teacher, and there was another teacher there that I overheard him talking to somebody about, they were saying, are you pre-mill or post-mill? And he was like, no, I'm pan-mill. He's like, what the hell is pan-mill? He's like, it's going to pan out in the end.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. But you don't know. And but it is. And when you add in, of course, from our perspective as people that have been studying more and more and more broadly, you're like, well, you realize there's other books that these people were looking at, such as, Jubilees, such as Enoch, such as the Shepherd of Hermas, and on it goes. There's a lot of other books that they were. So it's like, you can't just stay within the scripture to make your decisions, because the early church didn't. They had other books that heavily influenced them, and certainly other church fathers. So it's like, how are you going to make these decisions? And it just amazes me how much Christians, I mean, this isn't like, if I were a Christian, I wouldn't use this as a reason to deconvert. But I think looking back on it from where I'm at, it is actually a good reason to deconvert, that Christians are so diversified in terms of how they interpret things that you really have to say, like, I know we're joking that God's not the author of confusion, but if he really did want you to understand this, and it's clear that from the scripture, he wants you to understand what he's up to, or he wouldn't have written this stuff. He wants you to figure out how this impacts time and eternity and your life. He wants you to apply it to your life, and everybody's got a different interpretation. Again, I don't think it's the biggest reason or best reason to deconvert, but it is a reason that this God looks like he did a really shitty job writing his own book. And if he's that perfect and that brilliant and majestic, that he can do, quantum physics blindfolded in his sleep and just create galaxies by sneezing. It's like, okay, if he's that brilliant and amazing and he writes this shitty book, I'm sorry, but that's a discrepancy of itself. That doesn't make sense. This book is really, really poorly written. And that's where the hints come, is like, oh, I wonder if a bunch of people who were arguing amongst themselves and that didn't understand a lot of science and reality, just still kind of stuck in mysticism of sorts, if those people were just arguing against each other, and some of them got power and decided to pick which books stayed in and which books got kicked out, that kind of sounds maybe like it makes more sense than that this is a divine book. And I think that's where a lot of it, for me, like, I remember part of my deconversion was literally Ricky Gervais. He was being interviewed, I believe, by Richard Dawkins. They're just sitting in some library at Oxford or something. And Richard Dawkins asks him, like, what do you think about the Bible? And they go on to talk about it, I believe, but Ricky Gervais's first word was, well, it's obviously just a man-made book. And I remember as a Christian hearing that interview and thinking, that kind of makes sense. This does feel like it's just a man-made book, and like just that, like nothing else, period. It's just a man-made book, end of story. But once you cross that bridge, of course, that's where it gets dangerous when you're still a Christian.
Yeah, you make great points. And like you said, and I appreciate you said, it's not a good reason to leave Christianity if God is real and this is his word. Because then the problem is just us. We're the ones confusing it. We don't understand it.
Yeah.
So those are all valid points. And I want to draw attention to a very, very important point here to my story, because once again, I know people are going to watch this that are going to say, as they do, oh, see, he was still hurting and angry at God and depressed and couldn't feel God, and that's why he left God. Listen, that is not a good reason to feel. That is not a really good reason to leave God. I did not leave God because I couldn't feel his presence. I didn't leave God because he was making me feel like I wasn't a good son. I didn't leave God because I didn't like what the pastor and counselor told me. Look, my therapist had already gotten me, my good therapist, I told you, my Jewish friend, he got me back to a point of really good health by this point, by the time I left Christianity. So I was not in a bad state when I left Christianity. There's a lot of that story that I jumbled, I suppose. So it may have sounded like that, but it wasn't. This was over a course of like 2 years.
Hmm.
Um, and so by this point, I'm already healthy. I'm thinking straight. I'm going to work. I'm dating. I'm having a great life. Like things are getting better, right? Um, so I did not leave Christianity because I was angry at God or because His word was confusing or for any of the millions of reasons that some might say are a good reason. Because at the end of the day, if God is real and His word is true, it doesn't matter what all the reasons we have are leaving God. They're not good reasons. The only reason I left Christianity and left God is because I realized God isn't real and His word isn't true. Period. It's
Hmm.
a man. It was that simple for me. It had nothing to do with all my desires to go pursue pleasure. It was nothing to do with my anger, my sadness, my belief of all these other things that I don't like that He's doing. None of that had any bearing on it. Two simple things. This is not God's word. God doesn't exist. Period.
And in the context of your story and mine as well, it's like if God had been real, He had all kinds of time to show up big, answer the discrepancies, fix our faith issues, help us to get back on track. And I remember asking God, I'm sure you did too, like, God, if you're real, like I'm really struggling, I need you to show up in some way that answers these things because I feel like I'm not sure where, and I wasn't, when I was kind of saying that in my head, I wasn't like heading towards atheism. I was just like heading towards spiraling out of control. I was like, I just don't know where this goes. But
Right.
I can't do this. I can't teach my kids genocide is okay. I can't I can't not admit that it looks like these stories are copied from the Greco-Roman mystery cults. So I was asking God, and then you know how like C.S. Lewis had that thing where it's like this is the one true mythology. I was kind of going down that route a little bit. Like if if there's all these other mythologies that include blood magic and virgin births and earthquakes and healing the blind and all this stuff, and they're all pretend and they're fake, but Jesus is the real one. I was kind of asking God, like, can you prove to me or show me in some way how to understand this to defend the fact that Jesus copies all these other mythologies, but he's the real one? And I did go down that path a little bit, like C.S. Lewis did, because C.S. Lewis really acknowledged that stuff heavily. That clearly this stuff it looks like a copy, but this is actually, ironically, the real one. And I kept on asking God, like, God, show up and help me to figure out how to figure this out. You had arguably decades for God to show up and figure it out for you. Same with me. He never did. Instead, it was like, you become, if God had been real, it's like you become a write off. Like, I guess you're the prodigal son, and I know you're begging me to come home, but you know what? I'm just going to kind of wave goodbye and let you kind of keep drifting off to sea. I was like, no, 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 please don't let me drift. Pull me back. Pull me back. I don't want to leave. I want the safety, the knowledge of the answers that are truth. I want ultimate truth in my life. And it was like he just kept on waving. Sorry, the tide's taking you out. Goodbye. And again, you realize eventually that's not actually what happened. You were talking to yourself. You're talking to the drywall. He wasn't there waving goodbye. He just wasn't there at all. You're dialoguing with yourself the whole time, but you think you are when you're in it, and you're begging God to please pull you back in, and He never did. And that's part of what helps you realize the reason He's not pulling you back home is because He's not there.
Yep. And it is truly sad how much damage Christianity actually does to us, and you don't realize it until you get out. You think it's so great, but when you're out and you're looking back, you realize that. So there's many things. One is what you were just sharing. Talking to yourself or talking to an invisible friend. If in any other scenario but God, where you were an adult talking to your invisible friend, asking your family to go to China or wherever to do a missionary work to introduce them to your invisible friend and spend thousands of dollars doing that and to teach them to eat your invisible friend's son's blood and flesh, they would put you in a loony bin. They would absolutely say something's mentally wrong with this person. We need to fix it. If you're a little child, fine. You have your invisible friend for a season, like you have Santa, but you outgrow it at some point. But if you're still doing that as an adult, something's wrong. But because of the brainwashing of Christianity, you think this is healthy. And it's like you look back and you're like, I talked to an invisible friend for 42 years. Holy crap. I was mentally unstable. That's that's nuts. You know, listen, theism only gives God value. It doesn't give humans value. If you actually think through, because a lot of Christians don't, religions in general don't really think through fully the concept of what it means to have God. If there's a God, he absolutely demands your utter worship. And without him, you are nothing. And that's the way he wants you to feel. I don't care which God it is. That's the concept of a God. And so it completely and utterly takes away your value as a human being if you actually follow truly what it is to be a theist. Theism doesn't give humanity its value. Humanism does. And that was an awakening moment for me when I came out and realized that Christianity completely took away my identity. It took away my humanity. It took away my personal love for myself. It took away everything that I had of any value in myself. And so coming out of that, one of the worst, in my opinion, probably the worst thing that Christianity does to people is it takes away their identity. Like, you don't know who you are without Christ. And it's just like taking the time at 42 years old to have to figure that out is sick.
It is. And it's almost like you realize at the same time that like you've never really opened your eyes, to borrow again the Matrix. Like you have to almost step back and say, I'm discovering who I am, but even the construct to discover who I am is tainted. And I love how like Abraham Piper, John Piper's son, he talks about how when you leave Christianity, there's all these like assumptions, but they're based on the construct, not just the premises of the Christian claims, the truth claims, but just the whole premise, the structure. And for example, he says, when you leave Christianity, you kind of feel compelled to tell everybody why. I did, and you did, but also Abraham was like, you realize you can just leave and not tell anybody why. You don't have to explain yourself. And it helped me to think through, like, yeah, I am, and I still do. I'm still going to do it. I still do it a lot. But I'm like, you're right. Like, that's a great point. There's entire worldview structures that are woven into us that are going to take us years to even identify these roots of how deep they go. This shame, even to this day, if I'm tempted to look at somebody in a lustful way, there's a part of me that's like, I don't really struggle with it in the Christian sense of the word struggle anymore. But there's a part of me that still thinks that way, and that's still, purity culture affects people differently. But the ways that it affected me, I know it's still there.
It's
And
like
even
that.
though it's in your head, it's in your psyche, and you can totally be like, I realize Christianity is mythology, but Christianity as a system is still in our culture, in our politics, in our psyche. And you can't not have layers upon layers that you have to work through. And it's like, it's both exciting and depressing. I honestly felt like when I escaped 4.5 years ago, I was like, I won the lottery, because at least I've got some time left. But at the same time, now 4.5 years later, I realize you escaped, but there's work to be done. And I was telling somebody, just as a quick example, I was telling somebody I really struggle at times to relax, and it stems from the reality that when I was a Christian, I felt guilty for doing anything except sharing the gospel or preparing to share the gospel. Because that whole sense of like, if your neighbor is going to hell and you don't warn them, then their blood is on your hands. So you should be spending your life either directly doing something to talk to them or shine the light of Christ for them through a good deed, or preparing for it, pray for them, be in the word so you know the verses off the top of your head. And so if someone said, well, hey, it's Sunday football time, let's go watch a football game for 3 hours, I'd be like, of course not. Hell no. So my whole family grew up addicted to Sunday football and all that and all these college football things. I never watched more than 2 or 3 minutes of it because I felt so guilty. You have to be at the work of the kingdom. And to this day, I struggle to relax. If I watch, like, if I'm like editing a video or something or doing some work on the computer, I'll put the tablet to the side and bring up like Seinfeld or Frasier or something to just laugh at. If I've spent more than 15 minutes with that, like as not even my focus, my side focus as I'm working, I'm like, enough, that's enough of that. Get back to work. You've got something to do. 4.5 years after deconversion, I can't relax. And I know where it came from. And there's, we talk about endless other issues like that. but this stuff goes deep. It really does. On that note, and pass it all back to you. How is your healing going at this point? And what are you, I know you're going to elaborate on some of this with your book, but like, what do you feel like are some of the big ways that you've been healing recently?
Well, one of the ways is by writing. Uh, and I may be on the journey of healing from, like I said, shame. Much the same way as you, sometimes you still do things and you're like, I'm allowed to do this now. Why do I feel this way? That's a very frustrating thing. There's a lot of pent up frustration from my youth where I wasn't allowed to have sex or lust or anything. So it's like, there's a lot of pent up anger from that too, that I wasted my best years, and now I'm like, well, 40s, what can this guy have to offer this world? And you go through that a lot, having to feel like that. So one of my best forms of healing is I feel like if I can actually help others get free, especially if I can help friends and family that are younger before they lose half their life, that will be a win for me. That will be a tremendous healing for me.
Hmm.
Christians perpetually ask me, and I see it, they ask Christians in general, what if you're an atheist, why do you care so much? Why don't you just go and eat your babies? Stuff like that. Who cares? Why do we spend any time caring what somebody else believes? Well, I mean, as a Christian, you believe it's worth your time, energy, and effort to rescue someone from hell by preaching the gospel to them. Well, if I believe you're in hell, don't you think I should want to get you out? If I have the cure to cancer, you better damn be sure I want to give it to you. You may not see it now, but I guarantee you, if you take the time and read the book, you'll be grateful later. You'll be out. You will be cancer free. You'll be out of hell. And that's why that's what I'm doing now. And that to me is very healing. And I'm very passionate about this right now. And it's very exciting for me because I feel like my life can amount to something now. I feel like I can do something useful in this world and leave behind a legacy of somebody who actually helped free people from their cancer.
Yeah. My dad, he's already passed, but he used to say a lot when we'd go out like to a restaurant. He'd make sure that we'd always clear the table really well so that when the waiter came, they had very little to do. And he'd always say, leave it better than you found it. Or if we went to rented a place at the beach for a couple of days and we were packing up to go back home, he'd be like, you clean everything, vacuum it, wash the windows. We leave this place better than we found it. And it got stuck in my head. My dad and I had a lot of, bad memories, but that was one thing I took away that I'm very grateful for. And I say it to my kids, of course, and just to clean up context, but in the bigger context of this earth and our short lives, it transcends. It's like a transcendent message to me of like, leave this place better than you found it. You came in here, you got exposed to mythology, you lived your life that way. It is what it is. It happened. You can't undo that time. But from this point on, you were part of it. You pushed it on other people. You have a little bit of reparations to do, as it were. Try to undo the damage and try to leave this place better than you found it. And when you look at the beautiful children, the next generation, you just think, I want so much to give you a better shot than I did across the board. And it really starts with realizing mythology-based worldviews are based on obviously huge lack of information, huge misinformation, lots of indoctrination, like you talked about, and it has ramifications for the way that you see reality. If you get them young enough, they can't see reality right. Fantasy and reality get mixed, and to get, especially if you can get them young, to get them out of that. And it's such a beautiful gift. And I'm kind of jealous of the kids that are going to grow up and not have that stuff, not have blood magic and scapegoating as their default worldview. But you got to try. And I love the joke, like if I put 100 people in the kingdom, I want to take 100,000 back out. And it's I love that how you're saying, like, it isn't just like, oh, I got out, so I'm going to walk away. Like if you escape North Korea, but you've got a bunch of families still stuck there, you're not going to just be like, oh, well, sucks to be you. I'm here over in South Korea or the United States or somewhere. I'm living a great life. I'm sorry that you're still stuck there, with the dear leader. No, you're going to be trying your best to figure out, is there anything I can do to get my family out? And even if you can't, they're going to be in your heart and you're going to be burdened for them. It's true. And no one's going to leave prison and think, my best friends are also in prison, but to hell with them. I'm out. So I'm going to live my life up. No, you're going to care about those people. And it's funny too, because you're doing it, I'm doing it with no sense of reward. Like we're going to give our lives in sacrifice and love and compassion, knowing that at the end we get nothing for it. The Christians have this motivation of like, I got to do all this great stuff so I can hear the words, good and faithful servant, so I can get that crown and place it at Jesus's feet. It's like, what if you thought about doing some great work and giving your life away for something and being altruistic just because you want to, for nothing in return? isn't that actually more beautiful? Isn't that more amazing than doing it for rewards? And it's crazy when you really think through how it works.
Well, yeah, and I might even piggyback on that and alter something just slightly and say that there is a reward, not an eternal reward, but there is a reward, and it's that it's satisfying. It makes me happy to do this. I would be miserable if I were that person who escaped from that camp and didn't give two shits about my friends. But of course, I may not be successful, but I'm sure as hell going to try, and that's rewarding in itself. And contrary to what people think about, non-Christians or atheists, who are hopeless and have no meaning in life, and you don't do anything. All you want to do is live for pleasure and be hedonistic. I'm like, you're damn straight I want to be hedonistic and live for pleasure, but this is what it looks like. So stop getting this idea in your head that it's all about doing all this shitty stuff to the world. That's not what it's about. I'm a humanist and I care very much about the human race. I think we can be better. I think I would like to pass this on to hopefully my kid, hopefully my family's kids. This is important, and it does satisfy me. So yes, I'm not getting a crown to put at Jesus' feet, but I can still be a hedonist and it still bring benefit to the world and still make me happy.
Yeah. I think too a lot about that verse in Esther where Mordecai says, what if you're in this spot as queen for such a time as this? And I think we're in the middle of a cultural battle, whether it's you're talking about Christian nationalism or just general Christianity versus secularism. And, the very big doors swing on very small hinges, and there's little things we do that could affect things. And, you and I could do an interview and it could be that the next, one of the next presidents of the United States happens to watch our interview or something. It's like, it's crazy to think about how these things can have ramifications and ripples in time. But in terms of kind of bringing us home, I did want to ask, when you look at other people that are going through this, and you're obviously removed, several years from the hardest parts of this, I am as well. You're going to come across people that are in some of the darkest places where they know, number one, just they're shaken up to think maybe Yahweh's not there, maybe Jesus isn't real. Not to say that he was or wasn't a real figure in history, just to say that the mythology part of him is definitely not real. He's definitely been heavily mythologized and legendized. And if he was real in history, he's just a guy. But the Yahweh is definitely not real. And they're like, you know what, that has ramifications. I might not go to heaven. There might not be a heaven. I might not see my loved ones. And then, of course, the bigger cultural ramifications of if I think this stuff and become public in even the slightest way, people will give me backlash. They will hate me for it even. And they're kind of doing that count the cost phase, just like Jesus talks about. They're counting the cost and realizing, oh my God, like this is going to change everything. And it's just dark. It's just sadness and grief everywhere. This isn't, like you and I are talking about it, like we celebrated, we got out of prison, yay. But they're realizing that, yes, I'm getting out of prison. Yeah, there's the key. But if I use this key, very bad things happen very quickly. What do you say to people who are in that, just starting this and it's really, really looking dark for them?
Yeah. Well, to jump on your analogy there about them being angry at you if you tell them because now there's no heaven or whatever. When I was a Christian, and I've heard this from many people, pastors, Christians, whatever, that if you let your friends go through life and at the end they go to hell, they will be angry at you for not telling them about Jesus, right? Well, if we were to give a hypothetical scenario, which in a sense that first one's hypothetical too because it's not real, but if we were to give a hypothetical scenario where there was a way for you to have one moment after your death just to look back, you would actually be angry at me for not telling you that it was fake, because you will have realized that you literally wasted your entire life for something that doesn't exist. And all the moments in that very moment, all those moments of regret, of things you wish you would have done, will flush in, and that will be the end of your existence. Is that really what you want for people? I don't. Does it suck sometimes to realize that there is no eternal state, that I'm just going to die? Well, yeah. I'm also an agnostic, so I don't know 100% at this point. All the evidence seems to point that that's the end, but in my book, there's a chapter where I talk about heaven and discuss all the views of heaven. And then if you really press what people think about heaven, it really is boring. It's not exciting. There's nothing about it that makes any sense, but you just hold on to those pictures and those ideas. Really, the part about it that makes it sound great is just you get to live forever and you're not gonna die. But the ultimate thing you're going to isn't really that awesome. Let's face it. When you became a Christian, you had to choose between two options, heaven or hell. Nobody chose heaven because heaven sounded wonderful. They chose heaven because hell sounded awful. They chose heaven by default. If you were presented with two options, heaven or reincarnation, well, fuck yeah, give me reincarnation, right? Because at least if I don't like what I did this life, I have another chance. And then if I don't like that one, I got another chance after that. Like, that sounds far more exciting. You get to try over and over again. Heaven, sitting around worshiping a god, throwing crowns at his feet, just doing nothing but singing praises and walking on streets of gold. I mean, how long is it going to be before that gets old? You know what I'm saying? So I don't think you're doing somebody an injustice by helping them to get free of this idea of heaven, because honestly, if they did have a different choice, they would choose it anyway. So to me, as much as I will miss the idea of living forever, I much prefer ceasing to exist than having to be bored in heaven, worshiping a god dictator who kills children and has women raped and does all the things that the Bible said he did, even though that was the Old Testament. But he still doesn't matter which dispensation. The fact is, he did it at one point in history, therefore he allowed it. Therefore, this is a God who says at different times I do different things. Still, doesn't matter. He did those things, and those things were permitted. It disgusts me. So, do I really want to worship that God forever? No, that sounds like hell in itself. So, give me annihilation. A much better option. And now I have something more passionate to live for, this life. And I'm gonna do everything I can in this life to enjoy it to the fullest.
I was just going to say, just my regular viewers know I'm chomping at the bit to respond to that. So I'll just say this real quickly, and then you can get back to your advice for someone that's going through the hardest parts. But I'm one of those weird people, and I'll take that title if it's necessary, that I wanted to live forever. Heaven did not sound boring to me, and I know a lot of people say it did to them, especially once they escaped Christianity as a whole. But I was one of those weird people for whom it did not sound boring in the least. And remember C.S. Lewis in the Chronicles of Narnia, the last part of that book, he talks about this is like, I don't want to botch the quote, but it's something like, this is the end of this chapter, meaning the end of this particular story, but there's more chapters to be written. And let me tell you, just to give you a preface to it, the chapters that are going to be written, they never stop, and you can't imagine how good they get. And every chapter gets better than the last. And the minute you get to that, like, oh my gosh, that was the best chapter. Wow, what a story. It blew my mind. You can't top that. Like stop. It's like, when you get to the first movie in a trilogy, like that was great. And then they do movie 2 and 3 and they kind of botch it. Like, should have stopped at 1. The first one was great, but by the time you got to the trilogy, it's like you kind of went downhill. It's not like that. Every chapter gets better and better, and you can't imagine how good it gets. And I also took into the equation the idea that everything that's in this life is a picture of God's salvation or the future kingdom. So meaning it's not random. Evolution is bullshit. And so I thought everything that he does in this life is to picture something about our relationship with him. And you could argue for a lot of people, the best part of life is an orgasm. And so you would say, well, if God made that and he made it to last for a very short time, what if heaven is like a nonstop orgasm that you would want to keep going, and it really never stops and it keeps getting better? And if you could take the whole time idea of like the length of, you can't imagine how bored you'd get after trillions, quadrillions of years. Well, what if he could do it where a quadrillion years could pass and it felt like it was 1 second? Kind of like whether you're talking about Interstellar, that kind of thing, where time lapse things, or just the idea of like, I loved in Homer's Odyssey, where Odysseus and his men go to that island and they're there, sleeping with the lady gods and all that. They're having a blast, getting drunk, and Odysseus is like, "This has been great, but I need to get home. I've been here for 2 or 3 days. It's time. I got to keep moving." She's like, "You realize you've been here for 7 years?" He's like, "What? No, 2 or 3 days. No, 7 years. Time passed differently. He was just having a great time." I still struggle with losing heaven, and I still want to go there in an emotional sense. I don't have any delusions of grandeur that it's real, but it hurts. And that's one of my religious trauma is I am terrified of dying. I don't want to die, and I don't want to go into nothing, but I know that's what's happening. But that's my trauma, and I wanted heaven. I still do. And it's crazy when you try to think through like what that promise did to certain people, not everybody, but people like me. The loss of that is exponentially traumatic to this day.
Mhm.
It still takes my breath away.
Yeah, no, and I understand exactly what you're saying. I think, if I may propose, that it very well may be that you're coming at it from a different perspective. Like you're seeing nine and I'm seeing six. Um, and what I mean by that is you're proposing, as I was when I was a Christian, the theoretical idea of heaven,
Right.
not the realistic idea of heaven, not any form of heaven that could possibly be real, um, but a theoretical heaven where you can never describe it, but it's just always surreal, always out there that you're going to get there. There's no way of putting a finger on it and saying, this is why this will be great. We have no idea. We just trust a God that doesn't exist, that it's going to be great because he says so, and it will infinitely get better and better. So that's a theory. And so if you just theorize about heaven without actually thinking about the real facts of heaven and the structure of heaven, at least the way the Bible gives it, then sure, you'll miss it because that idea sounds wonderful. But when you really settle down, you look at the six or the nine, I can't remember which one I gave you, um, and you're like, yeah, that theoretical idea doesn't exist. This would be the heaven that existed. I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
But even that theoretical idea, even if you were in that heaven for eternity, you would still have to do it with that God.
Yeah.
That
Well,
that's
my theology was such though that I was, and I'm not talking about when I was escaping, but when I was in it, it was that when you are eventually glorified, you will agree with God on everything, including his just and righteous judgments.
that's
You
true.
will see that he has to punish sin, and whatever way he does it is right.
Yep.
And so anyway, but
Nope,
what
right.
could you just maybe wrap us up with some more thoughts on the people that are going through this to the point where it's just so hard? How would you recommend that they start? Obviously, for a lot of us, it's going to include counseling and therapy if you can get to a good secular therapist. But beyond that, is there anything else that you would recommend to people to kind of start to get grounded and reclaim their identity and just start to heal?
Yeah. First thing I would say is do not be anxious to try to find a substitute or an alternative. Um, you don't have to have the answers. I don't know is okay. That doesn't make you an imbecile. That doesn't mean you're dumb. It doesn't mean that you're lazy. It doesn't mean anything. It just means you don't know. You don't have to know. Forcing an answer just because it's uncomfortable to not know is not an answer. That's a terrible way to approach life. So better to take some time. Just let the fact that you've left this system of life that has embedded in you, you've got to just allow that some time to heal. There's not really any way for it not to hurt. It's going to. You have to be aware of that. Just be real with yourself and say, this hurts and it sucks. And I know it's going to take time. Therapy will help. It'll advance it for sure. But don't be in a rush to have the answers, because the number one problem Christians have is they think they have the answer. I know that I know that I know that I know, And so when you come out of that, you don't know anymore. And now you're like, I got to know something. And so you keep thinking like a Christian and you jump to something else and latch onto it. And oftentimes people do that with spirituality and they just jump to another. That's not helpful. Maybe that's where you land in the long run after you heal and you think through it, but be patient. Don't be in a rush to know the answers. It's okay not to. So
it's almost like
hurt.
Christians have this thing like, if you don't have the answers, therefore Yahweh. You don't know what how big the universe is or where it came from, how it all works. So therefore Yahweh. It's amazing that such a narrow-minded perspective.
Yep. No, it is true. It is true. And then, like I said, for Christians who are so used to that, you come out of Christianity and you don't know what it is, therefore, and you just make something else up. And that's not any solution. Now you're just going to be trapped in another form of brainwashing. So just take the time to heal. Let yourself realize that it's okay not to know for a while. Let things come naturally. When you're ready, you can start studying other options and other alternatives. I took about 3 years before I even came out in public. Jen had to come find me in a cave and be like, come on, man, start sharing your thoughts with the world again, because I used to love doing that, but I didn't want to. I needed time. I didn't know what I thought. I didn't think I had any use in this war anymore, So I'm very grateful to her for pulling me out of my cave and getting me back, back out here again, which is awesome. So that first interview was like, dusting the dust off, because I was very rusty. I haven't talked in a public type setting like that in a long time, even in an interview. So it was a little rough. So I'm hoping I'm coming back around. But but I'm grateful for her. So hopefully there'll be people in your life that will do that for you. So if you're watching this interview, know that I will do that for you. Um, if you want to reach out, I'm sure Tim will as well, but if you want to reach out, feel free to message me. You can PM me. Just go to my Facebook page. And I would love to talk with you. I'm here because I don't want you to go through this alone any more than I wanted to go through it alone. There is a community. There's a lot of community out here, and you just don't see it because you've been blinded from it because you were indebted in Christianity. Birds of a feather flock together, and you can't see anything outside of that. But trust me, you come out here, and there's a world of people out here that are not Christians that are really awesome, and you can build a whole community that you miss out here. It's going to take time maybe to find that in a local setting where you're one-on-one, but you can still, with technology, this is a prime time to be getting out. You can interact with people, you can talk on the phone, you can do what we're doing. I mean, I feel like I'm sitting in the same room with you. I mean, like, it's amazing. I just can't shake your hand afterwards, but for the most part, we're just talking face to face, and it's really nice. So PM me. I would encourage you to come check out the Life After Christianity community that Jen and I have over on Facebook groups. So join that. We would love to have you there if you're a Christian or in the process of non-Christian or in the process of deconstructing. Like I said, Tim's available. So yeah, those things are key to helping your health and getting your head straight. You're going to have a lot of questions, and we may not have all the answers, but we'll have some. And the ones we don't have, we can figure out together. So
I love it. What a great word. And the community part of this is just so critical for so many of us. We're so tied into church and Christian family and friends. It's like a real reset button. And if you don't know where to go, you don't know where to go. But I'm out. By the way, I'll have the link for that Facebook group beneath this page as well for anyone that wants to join it. Just going to say too, one of the things that's been so helpful, and it's something you said made me think of this, but just learning to take it easy on yourself. Like, you've been through a lot. You've been through trauma. You've been through on a hard journey. You've been lied to. You've been brainwashed. And to say, like, look, you're a heavily evolved primate on a rock that's spinning through Earth, through space. It's like you're trying to figure it out, and your life is so short that by the time you figure it out, it's over. That doesn't seem very fair, but it's the way it works. And you know what? We could all use a little dose of, like, don't take yourself too seriously. Get past, of course, the fear of hell, because if while you still fear hell, you're going to have to take it seriously. But once you get past that, realize that's mythology. You are who you are. To say, you know what? Take some deep breaths, relax a little bit. You get one life, and it'd really be a shame to go through this one life and not smile a little bit more, and not have some good laughter and some times of rejoicing and some times of fun. To take it so seriously and just to have all this existential angst for years at a time, like you're doing it wrong. If that's what your conclusion is like, oh my, I'm just in torment now because I've escaped Christianity. Like, I get it, and I've been through that too, but you're doing it wrong. It's time to reclaim your identity, and part of that, I think, is just trying to enjoy your own life. Like, this is your life, this is your time. Try your best to enjoy it, and reclaim the idea that life can be joyful, not because of some God or salvation. It can just be joyful because you choose to make it that, or you can be loving because you choose to, not out of an obligation for anything, but I just choose to be loving because I want to, and taking back your power. But so many of us, we've taken this stuff so seriously. Like, everything is serious. The word of God is serious. Saving your family and your friends is serious. It's all so serious. And it's like, oh, I can relax a little bit. And for a lot of us, and like I admitted before, I have trouble with that too. But it's time to enjoy your life a little bit. And I don't mean in some crazy sense, but like, enjoy your life. This is it. This is your one life. Have fun.
And I want to emphasize what you said earlier, and I think it's important that our listeners who are deconstructing or just starting in that process do not diminish that you have gone through trauma. I cannot emphasize that enough. Don't try to play it off. Don't try to be strong. Don't try to act like you're not. It is traumatic, and you will go through the 5 stages of grief. And it's important that you recognize them when they come. Most of all, for me, it was anger. I've cycled through that one several times. Because, man, does it make you angry when you realize what's happened. But just face them. You got to know what they are. Be aware of them. I have them in my book. I don't remember what the titles are off the top of my head. I just remember specifically anger in particular, because that was the one that I cycled through several times. But they're all going to come. And so when they come, just work through them, and you'll come out okay. It will be okay. It's going to hurt a little, but it will be okay. Promise.
And just with that word trauma too, it makes me think what a great motivation to help the next generation to give them not just a better chance at not having a mythology-based worldview, but also to avoid that trauma, and to admit, when you teach kids, there's a God up in heaven who can see in your head, and he's judging you and kind of hating you and kind of loving you, but he's also going to hurt you really badly if you don't do it his way. Like that's psychological child abuse, and that's a big motivator for what I do, and I'm sure for a lot of other people like yourself, just to say, we got to keep that trauma away from the next generation if we can. They deserve so much better. So, well, I know we've talked about a lot. Is there anything else you wanted to mention or touch on before we wrapped up?
No, I think we've covered everything under the sun today.
Yep.
I had a great time.
Ecclesiastes. Well, I'll have all the links beneath the video again for the interviews and work you've been doing with Jen Fishburne, as well as for that Facebook group. I can't wait. I'll have the link for your Amazon books as well. The two that are there right now are from a Christian perspective, so just buyer beware. But the one you'll have later this year, this fall, I'll add that link. So if someone happens to be watching this in November, December of 2024 or after, somewhere around there, we'll have a link for the new book, which I'm excited about. But hopefully we'll touch base and be able to do another interview when that book is out. So thank you so much. This has been awesome. I love your story, and I love the fact that your story is not just that you were a Christian, but you were a pastor, because to me, there's a little bit more punch when you were in that, to the level where how the sausage is made. You were at the top level of your church and so forth, and ministry. When people like you leave, I think it should arguably have a bigger impact, because people need to listen. You weren't just someone that was coming for Christmas and Easter, or you sit in the back pew listening and then you slip out. You were at the forefront of it all for decades, and you're willing to come up and say, this is wrong. This is mythology. I'm out, and I'll help you too if you want to. That, to me, that's a lot of power. That's a powerful message.
Well, thanks, Tim. I appreciate you. It was a lot of fun getting to know you too.
Absolutely. Likewise. Well, I'll wrap up then by saying we've been speaking with Alan Bondar. Alan, thank you so much. Great to get to know you, and we'll do it again sometime.
Have a good one.
Thanks.